Interact live, party from home. Subscribe, follow, send us your voice notes. Check us out on Instagram, Facebook, WhatsApp, or call us live in studio. Be where the world is going. Stay home and connect online. Boom 1069, IKTV. Join the evolution. It's all about you. Connect now.
Hello, St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Hello, Caribbean. Hello, world. Welcome to Page Turners Plus. Today we have a very special treat for you. We've persuaded Miss Cherie Jones, the author of that magnificent novel we discussed last, How the One-Armed Sister Sweeps Her House, to join us for a little conversation. Most of the Page Turners Plus team is here. On your screen right now, you're seeing Eric. He's in the United States. Raul J is in Scotland. Francine is in France. Cherie is in
Barbados.
Yes, I work and from. Welcome, Cherie.
Thank you. Thanks so much. It's absolutely a pleasure to be here. I'm so glad to see you this morning. So
And
thank
we
you.
are even more happy to see you. Kesawa will join us.
Okay.
I think she's having some internet problems.
Okay.
But in the course of the program, I'm sure she'll pop back up. No, those of you who've seen our last production where we discussed how the one-armed sister sweeps her house will, I'm sure, remember that Raul J left us with a kind of ticking time bomb. Um, and I am going to invite Raul J to detonate that bomb now and see how Cherie responds to it. So, Raul J, give it your best shot, honey.
Yes, thank you very much once again for coming, Cherie. Really do appreciate it. So
Thank you.
the sort of time bomb that I had was in the novel, Aiden has property on Baxter's Beach alongside wealthy expatriates.
Mm-hmm.
Aiden's house is described as being quaint and decrepit, while of course his neighbors live in very opulent houses, beach houses.
Yes.
Also, Aiden robs these people that live on the beach, and he ended up killing one of them in the end.
Mhm.
Was this deliberate? Was there a specific reason for it? And was it meant to give Aiden a sort of Robin Hood characterization?
Well, I'll answer the last question first. It wasn't intended to give him kind of a Robin Hood characterization because Robin Hood gives to the poor. Whatever Aiden steals is for Aiden. So that's the main difference between Aiden and Robin Hood. But the this sort of side by side positioning of the sort of very humble chapel house dwelling and the kind of lavish um, villa on the beach is a reality here in Barbados, and I'm sure in other parts of the Caribbean. A lot of the beachfront property along the west coast would traditionally have belonged to average Barbadians, and over time, I think as tourism became um, bigger business for us. There are lots of people from other places, lots of expats who've come back and developed beachfront property. So I think that's the reality in Barbados and in other parts of the world. So what you see in the novel actually happens. They are, bits of the West Coast, especially, where you'll see a really modest chattel house dwelling, and right next to it, a villa, so large and luxurious you wouldn't believe. So that's reality for us.
Well, I heard a plane in the background. I think that was you, Cherie. We don't have
No, actually.
it. Really wasn't? Oh, I just assumed it was
I heard
you.
it too. No, I'm in St. Peter, so the airport is way down.
Oh,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
see.
Not
No,
sure what that was.
I'm gonna invite Eric next, because his bomb is a little smaller, but it's still a bomb. So Eric, go ahead and shoot. You're muted, so unmute.
Okay, thank you. And again, good morning, Cherie. Good to have
Morning,
you here.
Eric. Thank you. Good to be here.
I have a question about passing. Uh, so, is there such a thing as passing for white in the Caribbean? And does Mira consciously pass for white to gain social and financial advantages?
Of course, there is. I mean, colorism is um, in many Caribbean countries alive and well, even though we might have progressed quite a bit from the time period in which the novel is set. So, definitely within the story itself, within how the one armed sister sweeps her house, Mira uses her color to her advantage, as it relates to her efforts to escape the poverty into which she's born and which she lives. Her father is a man of means, but her mother isn't, and based on how that union goes, she's not somebody with a lot of money, and she consciously uses her color to try to elevate herself financially. And I don't think that's unusual. We do have a tendency in the Caribbean to associate certain skin tones with um, class, a certain classes, or a certain level of financial capacity, which isn't really always reality. And for me, what was interesting was that even within that context, and knowing that is a part of our history, um, in the Caribbean, in Barbados, for example, we have the red leg community. And what's fascinating about that community is, of course, their origins, how they came to the Caribbean in the first place. But what it has meant is that there is this subset of the population, this group within the population, that physically appears white, or the appearance, they have an appearance that is associated with means, it's associated with the upper classes and so on, if you believe in those types of stratifications. But um the color is associated with a certain type of life, and the reality is that this group is quite poor. Their means, generally, as a group, they are not usually having a lot of financial capacity. So, that was interesting for me, and it was interesting that Mira used that within the novel to kind of get out of the situation in which she found herself.
Kesawa, I'm going to bring you in here because your internet is spotty. And now that we're seeing you, let's take the opportunity because we don't know if you'll be here the whole time.
I appreciate that. I'm going to jump in with the character of Esme. I love this character. I thought that you just did a brilliant job taking a woman who I think is often considered as a statistic or an afterthought rather than a whole person, because of what happens to her or what we discover is her kind of demise, or at the end, should I say. But she's not the center of the story as well, which also I think has a certain power to it. And I just wondered why you made that particular choice, because she's such a key player, but at the same time, somehow a minor character.
Mm-hmm. So for me, the main character in this novel is, of course, Lala. But in this, just like how we tell stories in the Caribbean, and I think just as a matter of, this is just how life is. You can't really appreciate and understand a person unless you understand their context. And context includes the people who might have shaped them. And one of the key people, persons to shape, or the key relationships, that would shape most people is that of, mother and child. And in this novel, I also wanted to explore a bit about intergenerational trauma and how, the choices of our mothers and our grandmothers help to perpetuate some of the realities for women that we explore in the book. And that is certainly the case with Lala. So for me, Esme was a key character in that I felt it was necessary to understand who she was, how she lived, because I think in gaining that understanding, we could get a better understanding of Lala and Lala's choices. Um, and Lala is the main character. So I would call Esme a key character, even if she's not one of the main characters for that reason. But it was really, she's one of the characters that I love, in the novel. I love Esme. I just think that, she had some very difficult circumstances, some difficult situations and experiences to deal with. But she was a fighter, and I hope that comes across in the novel. Quite apart from how her life might have ended, I think she was a fighter, and I really thought it was important to show that. So Lala does have that kind of heritage of fight, of, that impulse to survive and to transcend. But unfortunately, because she wasn't able to have some of the conversations with her mother and grandmother that I think might have helped her, she still makes choices that make life very difficult for her. So it was important to show Esme and show a bit of Esme's life in order to be able to appreciate that. Quite apart from that, I keep saying, how it is with us in the Caribbean in terms of how we tell stories. So, if I'm telling you a story about Lala and I say, and her mother Esme, I gotta tell you a little bit about Esme. That's just how we do it, So we're gonna go in that type of a circle. These circles just get wider and then they kind of get smaller, and we zero in on particular things, and then we're more expansive. That's how we tell stories. So I think there's a bit of that there as well.
All right, I want to bring Francine in now.
Thank you. I also really liked her.
Okay.
Yeah.
Francine, it's your turn.
I'm gonna get back. Actually, we were talking about Mira, doing what she had to do to get herself out of her situation and have, financial and economic stability. And when we discussed the book last week, one of the things I realized at that moment was that there appears to be parallels between Mira and the Queen of Sheba, and to a lesser extent, Tone, and even Esme in their profession, shall we say. I'm wondering if that was deliberate or that was deliberate or was just, that's just the way life is, basically.
No, that's definitely deliberate. I wanted to explore how we use, how we view sex as the use of the body as a way to elevate financially. And what was interesting for me growing up and just observing different things is, I found as a society to view that type of transaction in a particular way when it involved certain people and in a different way when it involved others. So what do I mean by that? So for example, when we look at the Queen of Sheba, we might have, or some of the characters in the novel might have a certain approach or a certain view, a certain perspective on Queen of Sheba. That's not particularly flattering based on what she does for a living. And that's why it was important for me, for example, to show her humanity, to show how she liked breeding the small dogs and what her dreams were and how she felt about her children. She's a human like anybody else. What's interesting to me is that we would look at somebody like the Queen of Sheba in that way. We would not necessarily view Mira in the same way. as an apparently white woman of means. She's essentially doing the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Quite apart from the fact that Peter actually loved her, her objective was to lift herself out of her circumstances by marrying a wealthy man, and that's exactly what she did. And a wealthy white male. So that's what she did. But we would tend in the Caribbean to look at Mira a little differently. And even though, for example, when Sergeant Beckles recognizes, hey, this is just, one of these women from this particular community, but she's a local. She's not really this wealthy white tourist as they might originally have thought based on her appearance. He's kind of less deferential. He starts calling her mom and all this. He stops calling her mom and so on, but still he doesn't exercise the type of power, or he doesn't try to sort of influence her in the same way that he would Queen of Sheba, right? Because of her color and because of her means and so on. If you look at tone, now I was thinking about it when I was writing this novel, and I was thinking, now, have I ever heard of a case where, a man was arrested and charged with prostitution on the beach? And I couldn't think of a single one. And yet, this whole this character is familiar to so many of us from the Caribbean. The man on the beach, usually wearing locks. I wouldn't say rasta, because I don't know that I can't say that just on the basis of having a locked hairstyle. But you'll have this male on the beach who's a hustler, and he's hustling all kind of things. He's gonna sell some jewelry made out of corals. He can let you know where you can get some weed if that's what you want. He can give you a ride on a jet ski, and he can give you other things as well. And that is a transaction with the same objective. So we have three different people trying to accomplish the same thing in the same way, but we as a society look at them differently because of who they are. And that kind of is a clue to the position of the poor Black Caribbean female, in terms of like the totem pole, and how the system views this woman and how this woman is likely to be treated. So that was something interesting for me to explore. And what I found was interesting too was that the beach is the one place where they would all meet. I can't think of anywhere else where the three of those characters would probably be at the same time. It would be the beach. I can't even say Bridgetown, because town is not what it used to be, but it's that type of thing. So I found that was something that was interesting. I wanted to explore that a little bit in this story.
On a similar question, we were, when we discussed the novel, we noticed that not only Mira engages in transactional sex, but her mother Martha engages in a form of transactional sex, which is more socially accepted. And also Esme's mother, Wilma, well, she is married off. It's really not her fault, but she is married off. She's seduced into marrying this man by the promise of wealth. So we view that as forms of transactional sex as well.
Yes.
And I wondered whether you view it that way as well, and whether you were commenting on that.
I certainly view it that way. Sometimes I shy away from saying that I'm like deliberately trying to comment on something. I think I'm more trying to hold up a mirror, and it's almost like I've been given this vehicle to do it. And what I'm doing is shining the vehicle. I'm making sure it has oil and gas and it can travel. If you see what I mean? So it's like the story is the car. You understand what I mean? So it's its own thing. And I kind of like just polishing it up and everything. And then I saying to everybody, hey, look at this car. What you see when you look at this car. So it's less of a comment, but yes, I certainly felt in crafting this story that I was trying to show a little bit of our hypocrisy as a society. Because at one end of that transaction, you have Wilma. So Wilma would have been a child, and there are all sorts of connotations and all sorts of concerns there. But Wilma was essentially put into a marriage as a way of accomplishing certain financial goals for herself and her family. And what I thought was interesting was that she was able to do it more or less with the sanction of the society, or her mother was able to do it with the sanction of the society. And you kind of go along this line. Is a matter of degree. So at one end, you're gonna have Wilma, and nobody's gonna make a stink about the fact that she's a child and she's, being married off and whatever, because it fits something, some of our values in a sense. So we're okay with it. It's the same thing. It's transactional sex, but it is okay because it is a socially sanctioned context. On the other hand, you're gonna have Queen of Sheba, or you're gonna have Tone. Well, Tone is a little better, is a different degree. But I would say at the bottom of the totem pole, from the perspective of a hypocritical society, would be the Queen of Sheba and how she would be viewed. And that is why you would have violence being meted out against her by the very guardian of the safety of the society, because it's kind of a way of showing that the woman, the Black Caribbean woman in that position, is a victim even of violence from the society in which she lives. So it's kind of like I said, it's a matter of degree. So there are all these people doing the same thing, but if you're doing it in a way that the society can accept, it's okay. It's still traumatic for the person who's involved in it. We might make all kind of moral judgments about it, or we might have certain perspectives on it, but it's like once we color it in a particular way that we think is acceptable to us, then it's all right. And I question that myself, and I think this story questions it as well.
One of the things I found interesting about the Queen of Sheba is that after she is subjected to this attack by someone who is supposed to be a guardian of public safety, she questions whether she really has been attacked.
Yes.
And she questions, because of my profession, can this really be done to me? And I thought that was a very good commentary.
Yeah.
And just to briefly get in there on that point, was in the first time that I read the book, it didn't immediately, stick out to me that Mira was sort of engaging in sort of very transactional, in the sense that, when you compared it to what Esme did or Tone, it didn't really stick out to me as that. I think that's just sort of how society has made us sort of oblivious to these things.
Yeah, it's true. It is true.
I'm going to open the floor. Is anybody else ready with a question?
Well, yeah, I want to jump in as well, following kind of the line with Sergeant Beckles, because we didn't get too much into Beckles in our discussion. But this since we're talking about him, and it's very clear what his intent was in the scene that you just described. But also, he, from what we read in the text, he seems to have this. I don't want to say infatuation, but it almost, he's almost emoting that he's in love with her. I mean, was this something that you were playing with in the text and with Beckles' relationship with Queen of Sheba?
I think so. One of the things that I found interesting in crafting this story was the extent to which the stories that we tell ourselves about our experiences and our choices make them more palatable. Um, so it's almost as if for Beckles, based on who he understands himself to be, there has to be this facade of love. I don't think Beckles is the type of person who would be able to say to himself, he doesn't have that level of introspection, um, or self-awareness to be able to say to himself, actually, my relationship with this woman is about power. And this is just one of the ways in which I demonstrate my power and my position as a male in a patriarchal Caribbean society. That's not something that's going to enter his consciousness. And even if you look at the way that he thinks about love and how he loves her, he says things like, this is the kind of woman that you want to buy and put in a house. Like, for me now, I would say, a modern woman with different sensibilities, I would I would think, like, how is that love? Like, you want to put me in a house, and even the connotation there, you're going to put me in a house. The next thing I think is that you're going to close the door and throw away the key. That's I look at that differently, but that is how he looks at it. So it really is about possession and power and not love, right? But love is a good story to tell yourself if you think that, if you want to be able to accept that what you're doing is good. I'm sure from Sergeant Beckles' perspective, Queen of Sheba was some sort of enchantress who just kind of drove him to what he did at the end. I'm sure that would be his story. That's the way he looks at it. From the perspective now of Queen of Sheba, I think for her, she had to ask herself some really important questions about the level of agency that she actually has over her body and her sexuality. And, even when she's out selling sex and when she's consenting to sex with Sergeant Beckles, even she internalizes that makes her less able to refuse at another point in time. And she doesn't do that on her own, despite the fact that she's, she may be feisty, forward thinking. She may be using her body in a way that is revolutionary, in terms of the way in which it goes against the morals of the society in which she lives, the community in which she exists, to elevate herself. But she really maybe isn't that revolutionary, maybe isn't as powerful as she might think, because even she cannot escape the internalization of, well, I would have said yes to this man or to this act previously. How can I now say no? Like, what did I really say no? Is it like, can I even say no? So I think those are important issues to examine when we're looking at the respective roles that we attribute to men and women in the Caribbean, in the societies in which we live, or in which I live, and how we expect gender to be performed, and how we treat people, not even just women, but people who deviate from that social norm or that standard. So
the floor is still open, guys. Anybody who wants to jump in?
Yeah, just to jump in here on Sergeant Beckles, because now that Eric mentioned it, I think he's deserving of like a few minutes, because he was on a serious power trip, because
I
think his ego's bruised when he got dropped from the
Peter Whalen investigation.
Yeah, and then here he is, his wife is serving him breakfast, and she's waiting for him to finish eating for her to get the leftovers. And I'm thinking, I mean, this this guy is on a serious like power trip, overcompensating for his inadequacies in the police force, typical macho man who thinks, well, if I can't do good in my job, I'm going to be amazing in my personal and sex life. And he was just an interesting character, in my opinion. Typical. I don't want to say typical, but typical macho man. Yeah, there we go. Typical macho man.
Yeah, there are some Sergeant Beckles around us, all the time. But one of the things that I found interesting too is the extent to which women in the novel and generally help to perpetuate some of these attitudes and behaviors. Because if you look at it, Sergeant Beckles has this wife who is patiently waiting for him to finish. And I don't know about you, but that's something that I saw with my older aunties and stuff. The man has to be seated at the end of the table, at the head of the table, and he gets the Pyrex dish with the most food. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but I have old aunties like that. That is like your uncle's food, and that is, there's certain things that we do, and we don't even think about them. We don't even think about them. So and it's like, for me, one of the things I think with my writing is I'm not passing judgment on anybody, because I see these characters, and in their own way, I understand and I love them regardless. But it's just interesting to see how they're shaped by when we talk about the macho man, part of what shapes him is a woman somewhere. So it's really about the attitudes that we have to some of these issues, and how perhaps, seeing them within the context of this story might kind of make somebody say, hang on, well, is that the right way? Is that really how it should be? Like, so should something change? That's what I'm hoping that the book will achieve.
I saw Kesawa trying to come in. Kesawa, can you hear us? Oh, all right.
Yeah.
I can. Can you hear me? Is the real question.
Yes, go ahead.
So now I wanted to say that in my own family, actually the Barbadian side, so this is really interesting for me.
Right. Yes.
I'm not going to name names because, but there are members of my family who brought some of these practices to England.
Yes.
And members of my family who were expected to leave school at lunchtime to put their father's dinner on the table and then return to school. And you just boggles the mind in the present. You're just like, how was that even possible? But that is not something that rested in the Caribbean.
Yes.
That's something that came with them to England.
Yes.
So I wanted to say that.
You know what I'm talking about.
Speaking of men.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna jump in and
Very
add that it's definitely not only in the Caribbean.
Mm-hmm.
And it persists to this day, because I have seen more than one discussion in internet groups about if you should serve the man first. The people have really long discussions about whether you should serve your man first or your children first. And so, yes, this still goes on to this very day.
Well, I will say I have my dad. I'm his first girl, and from his relationship with my mom, and my mom is very much one of these old-fashioned women. So when I was younger, she would do that. She would kind of put his food at the head of the table, and his special and stuff. And my dad absolutely adored me, and still does. And I didn't understand. I wanted to be so much like him. I didn't understand, that being a girl made me any different, and I insisted that I was to sit there. And I went and sat there, because that's like, so why he must sit there all the time. And sweet man as he is, he just, he was fine with that, because I guess that's his little girl, yeah. But then, later on, he would kind of say, somebody asked him, what song, if you had to if you had to choose a line from a song to represent Cherie, your daughter, what line would it be? And he said, "How do you solve a problem like Maria?" And the song the problem is that he created the problem. But yeah, so I think that, in challenging some of those things, as I grew and in observing those things, I think they remained very much central concerns for me. So I think writing this novel was an opportunity to explore some of those things because they form part of the story. So yeah.
The floor is still open.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in because I wanted to jump off of what you said about Sergeant Beckles believing that his relationship with Queen of Sheba was due to some kind of enchantment, and that Wilma actually made a very similar comment when she was in her interview with Sergeant Beckles, and she was telling the story, talking about how the women in her family basically are enchantresses and that men cannot help themselves. And I'm just wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about that. Is that another example of someone telling a story to make it more palatable to themselves, or is it just the societal influence that women enchant men to do the bad things that they do?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a belief. It's kind of like a trope that existed in so many cultural expressions in Caribbean society at various points in time. So there is this, image of the woman as enchantress. There's the woman who cheats on the man, who just wants the man for his money, who has a baby conceives a baby with another man and then tries to put it on this particular one who's more maybe benevolent or has more financial means. There are all of these things that, these images of woman in Caribbean society, and we would have had those at various points in time. But again, for me, one of the fascinating things that I would have observed about this growing up, and that I explored a little bit in the story, is the extent to which women perpetuate that. And there are two sides to it. There is one side where, even though, for example, Lala is the victim of certain things, Lala, makes a choice at one particular time not to have a child. And then when she's thinking through why baby died in this instance, it is like, well, because I did this and because I did that and because I did the other thing. There's this sense of self-blame. And again, women perpetuate that. So Wilma is saying, well, I'm really sorry for Aiden because once he get onto Wani Wilkinson women, that's the end of it for them. Then them women just like that is turn a man head. You can. I am sure we've all heard that somewhere in society, and that I just found that fascinating. Like, how could this be a woman's fault? You have instances where women are killed. I remember there was a story in Barbados. There was a woman who was at work in town and was murdered in front of her two young children, by somebody who was alleged to be her ex, who then subsequently killed himself. But this story was reported in social media online, and one of the local online papers, of course, carried this story. And you had women coming on and commenting about, y'all don't know what these women is do to the men, that some of these women like got the men real bewitched. And then, like it was as if, women were kind of saying, well, it was her fault. Whatever happened to her, it was her fault. She was one of them women. And, I find that is a fascinating aspect of our society, the extent to which we as women tend to inculcate some of these patriarchal values and then perpetuate them against ourselves and our daughters and our, our female relatives. And, so for me, Wilma saying that was really about bringing that out into the open in this story, because it's like fiction for a lot of people is a safe place. It's just a little story. So you just read the little story and you look at it, hey, how she could be telling the policeman that the women be bitching, but that's happening in your own community though. And you might not be seeing it, you might not be conscious of it in the same way, but you see it in the context of the story. And if I serve this story well, the next time you see it in society, maybe it triggers something and you ask the question. And that's really how I think we will achieve change, because a lot of the legal methods, the social methods, the direct methods, to me aren't really working. They're not having the desired impact. And I feel that one of the sort of unexplored frontiers in tackling some of these social issues is cultural representation, how our culture perpetuates these things, and therefore what we need to do to change it. So yeah, that's a lot to say, because I know I could real talk some things, but yes.
One thing that I just wanted to say was that one of the reasons why I absolutely loved your book was that every aspect of it I could relate to. I've seen it before in our society, and I feel that every Caribbean person should read the book because they relate to it,
Right.
sort of in the way that I've related to it. I just wanted to say that.
Thanks so much, Roger. Thank you.
On that same note, I'm not originally from the Caribbean. I have Caribbean roots. But there was one thing in the novel that I think an average reader maybe would look past. Mm-hmm. But there was a scene when Wilma took Lala to this white woman's house where Wilma was cleaning up.
Yes.
And she was giving Lala some instructions about what not to do. And Wilma told Lala, whatever you do, don't do number 2 in this woman's house. And when I read that, I cracked up because I remember my father saying the same thing to us. He said, you don't do that outside your house. He said, you do that in your house. So I'm just wondering, I mean, if that's something that was said in your family, or you heard that said somewhere else in Barbados.
For sure. I mean, the thing for me about this is like unapologetically a Caribbean story, and there are lots of things in there that I've actually observed, as I grew. But yes, that is a value that we have. That is something that we have. Like when you go into Barbara and you come into work with me and you want to do what? No. You gotta keep that till you get home. What are you talking? So I mean, it's things like that we laugh at now, but really those were some of the values back in the day. Like that was how, in the same way that, for example, the ability of a woman to sweep a house, to keep a clean house, was an important standard by which women were measured. I mean, I'm sure my mother tore out her hair at various points in my life over how I used to sweep or not sweep. It's kind of like, well, what am I going to do with you? You got to be able to do this. There's certain values that we would have had. So yes, they're not going to the bathroom in that way. Yes, that was one of
them. You mentioned about you referred to Lala's self-blaming. Mm-hmm. And I remember that was we had a whole chapter where we were inside Lala's head.
Yes.
So that had me wondering about how many narrators are telling this story, because certainly Lala was telling this story at that time. Mm-hmm. Then there is a voice I hear in the novel, which sounds to me like a villager. Mm-hmm. Somebody who is on the beach with all these characters and know them intimately. Mm-hmm. And then there is this very formal voice Well, I perceived it as a different, very formal voice. So I'm wondering if it's changing the direction of the conversation. I want to take it into the technical area now. How many characters did you intentionally? How many narrators? Sorry, did you intentionally put in the novel?
So I will say. So okay, I would say. Okay, well, this is a really good question. A really good question for a number of different reasons. So I would say, okay, so there's one part. The answer is there are multiple narrators. Part of the reason for that is I'm trying to have the reader as off center as a victim of violence might be, but to do that within the text. So that's the first thing. So that's one of the reasons they're multi. It is not a story that is told from one perspective consistently. And as a matter of fact, at some points it will go into more than one. I think even in the same chapter. I have, for example, at one point, the story is told from the perspective of the entire village. So you have the first person plural, we. And that's the scene when Sergeant Beckles comes to question Lala. And, it's like, we don't send people to her, and we this, and we watching, and whatever. And the story is told from the perspective of the village. And it's kind of like, the intention there is to underscore. It is almost as if Sergeant Beckles represents now the system when it's beginning to turn now onto Lala. Lala is now not just the victim of Aiden, but she's a victim of the wider society. And even in how the village, how the community is talking about that incident, it tells you a lot about the fact that they've turned their backs to the suffering that she's endured. So there's that. But there's also there are parts when, for example, we're telling the story of the one-armed sister. There's only one way to tell that story. I can't tell that story in the voice, the formal English of a particular type of narrator, because it's not that story. That story comes from my heritage, and there's only one way that I know that story can be told, and the narration reflects that. I couldn't tell that in any other way. And that then is a nod to, I think, certain aspects of the oral tradition. So what I'm bringing in there is less text and is more performance. It is more now like somebody telling you this story in the community. This is somebody that would be telling me this story, and I'm hearing this story as it would be told to me. I am not relating a story that was told by Wilma to Lala. I am now listening to that story being told. So there are different parts of the text where I try to get past, hey, this is a story about what happened. And I try to bring the reader into the story itself and be part of it. So that's part of the reason for the narration in that way. However, there are other parts, like when I'm talking about Martha, when she meets Wilma's dad. When she meets Mira's dad. Mira's dad. Sorry. When she meets Mira's dad, that story is told in a more formal way for a number of reasons. I mean, even if you look at the context and how it happens and the relative, the power dynamics between those two. And I kind of also turned that on its head, because in that situation, the one with the power and the means was a Black man, which is something that wouldn't normally, or I shouldn't even say that wouldn't normally. I shouldn't say it wouldn't normally, because once it is, it's normal. It's normal for somebody. But typically that's not what we would see or expect. That's how I should put it. But yes, so for me, at different points in a novel, the story had to be told differently. And I just went with that. At one point, I had a writer that I very much respect, a Caribbean writer, review the manuscript, and that was one of the things that had me kerfuffle, as we would say. I couldn't, like, I was thinking, oh my gosh, well, this part when I'm writing it, it's one particular voice and it's one perspective, it's one approach. And then there would be parts of it where I felt like I was going back into a more linear, more formal narration. And I just struggled with that because I knew I wanted to do something, but I wasn't too sure what it was I wanted to do. And this person kind of said to me, you need to free up yourself and tell this story the way that you think it should be told and the way the story demands to be told. And I just went with that. So yeah, you're getting, sometimes it's Lala, you're in Lala's head, and sometimes it's somebody else, and then it's the village, and there's this sense of like a shifting reality. So yes, that was deliberate.
And I want to thank you for having taught me the Bajan word federation. I went to school in Barbados, and I did not know the word federation. So thank you for teaching me that.
Well, the thing is, no, I don't know, because this is something that, like, again, I would have heard. I'm thinking about one of my old aunts in particular, my granny's sister. And she's one of those aunties. She's so old, you don't even call her by her name. You just say aunt, their aunt. I can't tell you what her first name is up to now, because that's just how it is. But when
we had auntie in my family.
You understand? it just means that it's so old and wise. You stop calling them by the name and you call them by the degree. It's like, that is respect. You know what I mean? Aunt, their aunt. Anyhow, so I think she's the person I heard when I was really, really young. She used this term, and I was thinking, like, what is that? What I mean? Like, what does that really mean? But yeah, I understood it then. To me, that's confusion, chaos, and it's a reference to that part.
When I first saw it in the text, I read it again because I'm like, what did I miss? And then I think after it was used a couple of times after that, then I said, oh, it's moderation.
Yes. But there's that. There's some references in there that, I remember with my editors especially, they were kind of like, they would send me these little editing notes in the margin, and they would ask these very, very politely delivered questions about some of the things that I had in the book, So I had things like, Aiden was barring Lala on the bicycle. And somebody wrote to me, one of the proofreaders, like, okay, do you mean that he was transporting her on the bar of the bicycle? And I said, yes, that's exactly what I mean. But you can't write it any other way, because what we would say is he was barring her on the bicycle, full stop. So it has to be that way. You see what I mean? Or they would ask me things like about the cob bottle. So I remember my dad used to tell me about when he was young, and they had the sweet drink bottles with the marble in the top, and how that was how you would stop the sweet drink. And I would be thinking, like, how would that happen? Like surely it would drop in and it wouldn't be fizzy and whatever. But when I wrote this thing about the cob bottle, it was like my editor was like, what you really mean by this? And I had to like send a reference to say, well, this is what it is. Something that I didn't expect was cheese space. They asked me, what do you mean by cheese space? This is like something like a food. And I'm thinking, with that one, I kind of scratched my head a little bit, because I'm thinking this is self-evident. And I'm also thinking, well, everybody knows cheese space. Everybody in the world gonna know cheese space. And I said, yes, it was, and so on. But so it was things like that I kind of really recognized the extent to which I mean, and I can't even say that because it wasn't like I deliberately sat down and say, okay, I'm going to write a Bajan story, or it's going to be a Bajan story. So I have to put in this and it wasn't anything like that. That was just the story. So when people started asking these questions, I was like, oh, well, maybe somebody from another part of the world wouldn't understand this. But at the same time, to me, I wasn't apologizing for it, and I didn't want to make it more understandable or palatable. There were one or two things that I gave in on. So like okay, so we have I think there's a part in the book where we're talking about what Rainford did for a living. And it was something like saying he's an itinerant vendor of assorted household items. That's like 5 or 6 words. There's an expression that we have for that in Barbados. But the editors at first it went through because that's what I had. That's what we would say. I think we say that up to today. And then I thought something happened, and she was kind of like, explain this one to me. And I said, well, this is how we would refer to somebody usually of East Indian origin who would be selling these things, driving around in a van. Y'all know what I mean. I'm not gonna say it on the thing. And she's like, no, can't say that. Can't say that. Had to come out. So that one I gave in on because, the thing is, even if there are things that we say, if they're not respectful or anything at this point in time, and we know this, then we don't, I can take it out, right? But for me, this was a Bajan story. It was a Caribbean story, and it had to be true to what it is. So that was that.
We only have a few minutes. Is there anybody with an urgent question? Who has an urgent question? Go ahead, Kesela, with your urgent question.
Me?
Go ahead, Kesela.
Very urgent question. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So I'm gonna squish 8 questions into 2.
All right.
You're obviously a brilliant writer. We've loved your work, but you also work as an attorney still. And so we just kind of wanted to ask if you would have thoughts on how you actually managed to maintain your motivation to write your novel. You've talked about being a short story writer for a long time first. How you kind of maintain the motivation to keep writing when you clearly had many other things going on at the same time. And also you got published, you got this big international publishing deal, and then you found your books couldn't get distributed in your local country. And so advice for anyone watching who's thinking about, can they get their stories told, and how to maintain the motivation long before they get close to that book deal?
So that's a really good question. The first thing I would say in terms of the writing and my practice during the day and all the other things that I am so much better at all of those things if I do write. I'm the person, I'm in a meeting or a conference and I'm scribbling on a napkin because something just came to me and I have to get it down at that point in time. I am not a very pleasant or productive person when I have stories backed up in my head and characters who are talking to me and there's work to be done. So it's better for everybody if I just get the time to write. And it's a compulsion. It's something that I have to do, right? So what I would do is I would get up at 3 a.m. I would write all, lunch times. There was this time that I used to go and park in the supermarket, in the parking lot at the supermarket, and have a sandwich and a little box juice and sit down and scribble in my lunch hour. I would take my entire vacation and go to a writers and artists colony, which is like up in the mountains in Arkansas. You can just see the deer. There's no television. You don't talk to people during the day except at dinner. And I would just immerse myself and write. So my writing isn't kind of like this hobby that happened to do really well. My writing is like my calling. So it's funny because I think for most people it probably looks the other way around, but I have to work because I can't burden my writing with supporting me, because I may never be successful at it, but it's important, so I have to have a job. And I do my job to the best of my ability. But there's no question for me what is my main contribution to the world. So I don't get that tie up. I'm clear on that. You know what I mean? So there's that. So I didn't really have to get motivation because I was doing it all the time anyway. What I will say is that there were many times when I thought, oh, I'm just going to give up the day job and just go. And I want to get this book deal. And I want to be able to just write for a living and teach and talk about writing. That's all I want to do. And I would have pursued that, at different points in time. I had this huge master plan. And I always say, I'm not the one who got the book deal at 25. And then just wrote books after that. It was a hard slog for me for 20 something years. So for people who are trying to do it, I would say, first of all, focus on the work. Focus on making the work the best you absolutely can. Define success for you as a writer, because at one point I thought success is the international publishing deal. And I did all these things to try to get it, and it wasn't happening. And the last step in my master plan, I started on that journey, and then things happened and I had to come back home, and I thought, oh my gosh, that's it. And I had to get to the point, I was very despondent at that point in time. And I just thought, you know what, Cherie, you can write anyway. So regardless of whether you get the publishing deal or, you get the teaching job or whatever, you're going to write, just write your story. It will do what it has to do. It may not even do it in your lifetime, which would be really sad. But, I kind of had to get to the point where it ain't about me. If I really serve in these stories, it's not about me. So the ironic thing was, when I got to that point is when I got the publishing deal. I laugh at that all the time, but prior to that, I would be winning competitions. I would be writing. I would be winning fellowships and doing all these things. I just couldn't get this deal. And when I finally stopped pursuing it and said, success for me as a writer is writing to the best of my ability and serving these stories, that's when things happen. So your journey that's what I would say for writers, focus on the work, define success, and then accept that your journey is yours. It may not happen in 2 years, it may not happen in 10, it may not happen in 25, it may not happen when you're alive, but I believe if you serve these stories well, then you're successful. And that's it. That's enough.
Thank you so much for that, Cherie. This has been a wonderful conversation. Bye for now. When next you see us, we'll be discussing Ayana Banwo's
When We Were Birds.
When We Were Birds.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm reading that now. That's why. Yes.
Wonderful.
Yes.
You answered one of the questions that we had for you. What you're reading right now?
we run out of time, unfortunately, so we have to go. But thank you so much, Cherie. We really enjoyed this. Bye-bye.
Good night. Bye-bye. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Keep calm. We're online now.